I'm going to show you what is a worm for beginners that are fresh into vermicomposting, and I'm also going to show you what they can do for your garden. And we're going to talk for 10 minutes about worms, and then I'm going to show our garden. So, starting it off, well, actually, if you stay till the end, I'll show you how to win a free pound of worms also. So, starting it out, red wigglers are they're like a earthworm that people are used to seeing in the garden, or on a nice rainy day when it's really soaking wet, the worms will actually come up from the dirt because they can drown, and they'll crawl across the driveway or whatever and you'll see them. But those worms don't look like the worms in my bin, because the worms that we sell are composting worms. And the composting worms, what they do is they eat any type of food that you put in the bin. So stuff like vegetable scraps and any type of food or organic matter, they'll eat through it. Not instantly, but they will over time eat through it. And the earthworms, they mostly just create burrows in the soil, which then create water channels in the soil to help aerate it. And they pretty much just eat dirt and some minerals from the rocks or gravel and stuff like that. So they're not necessarily going to eat the food scraps unless you put the worms in your garden to then eat food scraps. But then you also have to add food scraps and keep them moist, or they will dry out and die. So we don't want that to happen, so always keep your worms pretty damp. And you'll notice if it is too damp, they won't be moving around as good if they're dried out, because they do breathe through their skin. So always good to have lots of moisture. And red wigglers are smaller worms, but the red wigglers we have are actually pretty chunky and thick with it. So, but they typically are, if it's a baby worm, it could be as small as your fingernail, or it could be up to 4 to 4.5 inches long, just depending on the life cycle and where it's at in its life cycle. So, like I said, they like it damp, and they love stuff like compost piles or old leaves or anything natural like that just naturally falls in the forest. So even if it's a tree, they'll get up underneath the tree for the moisture and hope for some food to come along, like some leaves. So there is ways to do it. If you didn't want to have a bin, you can put them in the compost pile, keep them wet, and they'll be very happy. So also they like it dark. They don't like light. They actually can become paralyzed from the light after so long. So darker the better. And they also like lots of aeration where they're living. So if it's just an old compost pile out in the yard that you never turn or aerate, you might not have the results you're looking for. So getting into what they eat, I've done a lot of videos on what they eat. Just an example of some of their favorite foods would be like banana peels, and the banana itself would be even better. And they also make the garden grow greener. And they do that because they'll eat the stuff that you put in there, like bananas or whatever. But we feed our worms worm chow with food scraps. That way we know they're very healthy and there's no gaps in nutrition, to where if we just have bananas, there's a broad spectrum of stuff in our worm chow to then always have something for them to eat. And also they help the environment by making the soil better and turning what is just your average dirt, whether you're in Florida and it's sandy, or you're in Alabama where it's dark red clay soil, they will get in there, and depending on how many worms they keep it, they regulate their own moisture, so you don't have to water the garden as much. And like I said, as long as you keep them wet, they'll be having a good time out in the garden. And they also, let's say you're cutting lettuce in the garden and you drop a couple leaves of lettuce, the worms will actually work through that lettuce. Might take them a week or two, but it'll actually disappear. So you're cleaning up your yard, and you're also converting what would have been trash to a landfill into a resource for your garden. And they're making the burrows, they're making the water better, they're getting rid of any type of pollutant or toxin that's in the food. They process it through their body, and then out the other end it comes out cleaner, to then leave behind what's called a casting. And the worm castings is basically worm poop. It's just a fancy name for worm poop. But anyway, so the casting is where, like, say they're eating a banana, it gets turned into a black humus. And humus is like decomposed compost, where you put it in brown and then it comes out black. And in my opinion, you're not going to have a good garden unless your soil is dark black. So the only way to do that is to add black stuff to it. You could buy a whole bunch of stuff and all this, but the short answer is to get some worms and get to composting. And so we'll touch into, well, I'll get to composting later, but anyway, so we'll get back to the red wiggler. And the red wiggler is what's called hermaphrodite, and they possess the male and female reproductive organs. So there's not a male or a female worm, it's just the worm. And when there's two species of the same type, they'll come together and they'll actually move inside of one another through their clitellum and kind of get hooked up. And anyway, that's how you make baby worms. So, and the clitellum is the fat, thick part on the worm where they're skinny and then it gets thicker. So that's how you know you have a adult red wiggler. And so once they've reproduced, they'll then have a cocoon that is pushed out over their body, and then it's laid a nice little yellow sack kind of. And you can see, if you look real close in our videos, we have a lot of cocoons in our bins. And so then out of that cocoon, might take, could be a month or 2 or 3 months, but that cocoon will hatch when everything's right in the bin. And so then you could have 5 to 20 worms come out of that cocoon, and then the whole cycle starts over again. So if you want to get your garden growing greener, always recommend the natural way to do it, which also helps save the world, in my opinion. And then you have the knowledge to then share with your friends, hey, this is this is the right way to do things. And you might not think it makes a big difference, but we haven't thrown away a single drop of food scraps in months and months. So you do that over a year, that's a lot of tonnage and material that, instead of being just wasted, you get to use it right then on your tomatoes or lettuce or pepper plants, and get to try some of the best tasting vegetables, in my opinion, that you can have is with worm castings. And also, you're not using any chemicals on your plants too. And on top of that, I also would like you to think about, if you haven't gardened before, it is a lot of work and a lot of effort goes into it, but it's always worth it. And the saying goes, you reap what you sow. So if you sow a lot, you'll get to harvest a lot. So we've been sowing a lot, and I've been spending almost all my free time working in the garden. And when I'm not working in the garden, I'm working on the worms or helping out, getting the orders sent out to you guys. So we've been trying to set a good example on what worm castings can do for your garden and everything that can just make a better person. Because if you're eating better food, you'll be a healthier person. And there's nothing like starting a plant and then taking care of it for a few months and then finally getting that fruit or vegetable that it produces. So just like for you to think about that. And also, if you're driving down the road and you go past a house and you're like, wow, look at that grass they have. But at the same time, if there was a house with a beautiful garden right next to it, there would be, to me anyway, I would be way more drawn to that garden. And also, it's just more stuff to talk about. If somebody comes up and is like, wow, pretty grass, that's the end of the story basically. But if you have a few hundred different species of plants growing, that's a whole nother ball game basically. And in my opinion, everybody should have a garden, and it would make the world a more beautiful place. So with that, I've got a pretty good Bible verse for you, and it'll be Matthew 13:3-8, and it is the parable of the sower. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. So with all that being said, you get what you put in, and the harder you work, the more rewards you get. So don't think you can just throw some seeds out into regular old dirt. You'll have regular old results basically, or if you get anything at all. So just think about, you ate that banana, you then took that banana peel, put it in the worm bin, let it sit for 3 months, and after continually feeding the soil, you then take that soil and put it on the plants. And that's about as simple as I can explain it. It takes nutrients to make nutrients, and if no one had been composting or adding to the soil, you're just going to take what little's there. But if you're composting with worms, the worms themselves make the soil better, even if you didn't put a lot of good food scraps in it. So, and also, if there's no worms in the garden to start with, you could be lucky and have a lot of worms in your garden, but the only way to know is to get a shovel and see what's going on. So, something to think about. But anyway, we'll get to what we're showing you on the screen, and that is a lime tree right here. And the lime tree tastes night and day different than what you'll get in a store. And I do believe it's the stuff they put on the outer shell of the lime to preserve it. And not only that, they grow those lime trees for a long shelf life and not for flavor. And that goes for any vegetable. So by buying that food from the store, yes, it's easy, and I know not everyone has the time to get off of work and go work in the garden, but think about your kids and the future generations of you composting and saving those food scraps up to make the dirt better, not just for you and your family now, but future generations, or the person that gets the land that you have now. That land will already be in excellent shape, and all they have to do is throw the seed out. So everybody says it's a good idea to pay it forward in a drive-through. So think about the last time somebody paid it forward for you. You're like, wow, that's awesome. So think about that when you're like, well, that's a lot of work to take those castings and put it out to the garden and do all this. You're paying it forward for the next man and future generations to then have it set up so they don't have to work for months and months to get it set up. And in my opinion, what an heirloom thing to give somebody. So with all that being said, here we are with some strawberries, and the strawberries, they don't last but maybe a day once you pick them. So the strawberries in the store, they definitely have something on them to make them last longer for a shelf life. So it is a lot of work, but think about all the chemicals you don't have to eat and all the preservatives that you don't have to expose yourself to, and all the medical bills that you won't have to pay. Not saying that it'll cure everything that ails you, but these are just my opinions and my thoughts on the subject. And we'll just get back to talking about plants. Here we have some tomato plants, and if you haven't ever had a garden or tried growing anything, it's basically as easy as putting a tomato in some castings. And we've even grown tomatoes in 100% worm castings. And that was actually why I started this business, because I was still on the fence about worm castings, because there's just not a lot out there at the time when I started about what it can actually do for your plants. So after many years of gardening, I finally found that worm castings were supposedly the best dirt. So we took a try at doing it ourselves, and we were in November, and we had a tomato plant that wasn't doing so great, and he was real weak and not doing so good. So we took him, and we had a big bucket of castings, like the whiskey barrels I show in the video, and it was slammed full of worm castings. And so I was like, well, we'll just take the tomato plant, see what happens. And we stuck them in pure worm castings, and they'll tell you to just use 20 or 30%, and that probably is true. But we took 100% worm castings with the tomato plant, and he threw a tomato bigger than your fist in November, December. So now that's just a tomato. I wouldn't say every plant will be like that, but that really opened my eyes to, wow, this is, absolutely the best way to do it. So that's why we went ahead and we went full into vermicomposting, and I thought it'd be a great way to help the world and share the wisdom to basically get everybody gardening and showing them what it can really do. So anyway, here we have some corn that we planted, and corn isn't that easy to grow, but we took a handful of worm castings and put in with each plant, and every time we did that, we only had, out of all the plants you see, we might have had 5 or 6 that didn't make it. So it really does big things, and also the worm castings help retain the moisture for the plant, so also aeration for the plant, and right at that root mass, the plants have almost everything they need to get established to then send their taproot down into the regular dirt. Also, when it rains, that scoop of castings then makes worm tea naturally as it rains and drops it down to the roots. And then if you have worm castings with cocoons or maybe some baby worms in it, those worms then get put out right into where the plant needs it, and then can go through making their burrows through the soil. And if you make a hole, let's just imagine you make a hole in the dirt, we've all done it, it'll fill up with water. And so now you have porosity in the soil. And if you don't know what porosity is, it is where you have holes in the surface, and those holes allow air and moisture to reach down through. Whereas if there was no worms, it would just be hard, compacted dirt with nothing in it. So I do think, with all that being said, earthworms are the most important creature on Earth, because without them, we would have no food, our dirt would not be anything, and you wouldn't have any kind of, well, the food scraps would pile up and we would just be walking through old food scraps everywhere, and it would be a rough place. So keep that in mind when you're taking care of your worms. It's not really something that you should take lightly. You should really care about them and try to do good with them, because God put them here for a reason, and in my opinion, we are just caretakers of the land and the animals, and that's kind of our role in the environment and why we're here. So keep that in mind. And so if you are somebody that works a lot and doesn't have a lot of free time, I would say that strawberries are one of those plants that you don't have to do a lot to once you plant them, and they grow year round, so there's not a lot of maintenance or trellising to be done. And every year, starting, it was about 2 weeks ago, so about April 15th for us in Alabama, we've been getting strawberries every day, about that handful plus a little more, just out of this, I'm pretty sure it's like an 8x4 raised bed, so it doesn't take much space if your soil is good and you've took care of the dirt. The plants will then take care of you. So here we are on a lime tree, and the smells off these flowers are insane, like so good, and the best smelling thing in the garden right now. And then we have some lettuce, and don't sleep on the lettuce. I know I did for a couple years. I was like, garden lettuce, there's no way it tastes as good as that store-bought lettuce. But I'm here to tell you, it doesn't even come close once you get over the, I don't know. I had the fear that stuff out of the garden was kind of bad for you or whatever. I don't know. Just planted in my head over years from who knows where, family members, whatever. But once you try it and then eat it for a couple days, you can't even eat the lettuce from the store anymore. So definitely try it out. And that's one of those things that's going to produce more than you can even eat. And it's me and my wife, and out of one 8x4 raised bed, we've had more lettuce than we can eat. So definitely get you some lettuce going. And we got some new products out on our website, and we make our own premium potting mix, and that's going to be your best deal on the dirt. And then what you just seen was our worm starter kit. It's new and it's a really good deal. And we have red wiggler bait cups and a small bag of worm castings for now, as we're still trying to get our garden the way we want it. Also, the worm chow and the premium grit is different from just oyster shell, which we also sell. Is in a flour form, and the premium grit is something that I've seen that the worms enjoy more, and it's healthier for them, and they'll be more active and just a happier worm. So with all that being said, you're ready to check out our website at harleysworms.com. Legends for staying till the end. See you guys next time. Thank you. And also, if you want to win a free pound of worms, we still have a contest going on, and all you have to do is go back on the video before this one, drop a like, be subscribed, turn on your notification bells, and leave us a comment. Thank you guys. See you next time.